In today's video, we are going to explore the incredible story of how the United States of America became the most powerful country in the world. Just a few centuries ago, this nation did not even exist. The land that is now the United States was once a collection of small colonies controlled by the British Empire. But through wars, revolutions, economic growth, and global conflicts, these colonies slowly transformed into a powerful nation that would eventually shape the future of the entire world. The rise of the United States did not happen overnight. It was the result of many historical events that changed global politics forever. From the American Revolution against Britain to the massive battles of the World Wars and the intense rivalry of the Cold War, each moment helped build the power and influence of the United States. Today, America is known for its military strength, economic power, technological innovation, and global political influence. But the journey from colony to superpower was long and filled with challenges, wars, and major turning points in history. So in this documentary, we will explore the complete story of how the United States rose from a group of colonies to become one of the most powerful nations on Earth. To understand how the United States became one of the most powerful countries in the world, we must first go back more than 250 years in history. In the 18th century, the land that we now call the United States was not an independent country. Instead, it was made up of 13 colonies that were controlled by the British Empire. These colonies were located along the eastern coast of North America and were home to farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and settlers who had come from Europe in search of new opportunities. At first, many of these colonists considered themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown. They traded with Britain and followed British laws. However, tensions slowly began to grow between the colonies and the British government. After the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, Britain faced huge debts and began imposing new taxes on the American colonies. These taxes affected many everyday goods such as paper, tea, and imported products. The colonists were frustrated because they had no representatives in the British Parliament. They believed it was unfair to pay taxes without having a voice in the government that was making these decisions. This anger led to a powerful slogan that spread across the colonies: "No taxation without representation." Protests soon began across colonial cities. Merchants boycotted British goods, and citizens organized demonstrations against British policies. One of the most famous protests occurred in 1773 when a group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and threw hundreds of crates of tea into the water. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government responded with strict laws intended to punish the colonies. Instead of calming the situation, these actions made the colonists even more united in their opposition to British rule. By 1775, tensions had reached a breaking point. British troops were sent to seize colonial weapons stored in the towns of Lexington and Concord, but colonial militias were ready. When the first shots were fired between British soldiers and American militia fighters, a war had begun that would change the course of history forever. This conflict would soon become known as the American Revolutionary War, the war that gave birth to the United States of America. After the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in 1775, the conflict between the American colonies and the British Empire quickly spread across the region. News of the fighting traveled rapidly, and thousands of colonists began preparing for a larger war. Farmers, workers, and local militias joined together to defend their towns and resist British control. At this moment, the colonial leaders realized that they needed a united army to fight against the powerful British forces. Representatives from the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for a meeting known as the Second Continental Congress. During this meeting, they made an important decision. They created a new army called the Continental Army. To lead this army, they chose a respected military officer named George Washington. George Washington had previous military experience and was known for his discipline and leadership. Even though the new army lacked resources, Washington accepted the responsibility of leading the colonial forces against one of the most powerful empires in the world. The British Army was highly trained, well-equipped, and supported by the strongest navy at that time. In comparison, the colonial soldiers were mostly volunteers with limited weapons and supplies. Many of them had little military training. Despite these disadvantages, the colonial forces showed great determination. One of the first major battles of the war took place in June 1775 at a place known as Bunker Hill near Boston. During this battle, colonial forces defended their positions against repeated attacks by British soldiers. Although the British eventually captured the hill, they suffered heavy casualties. This battle proved something very important. It showed that the colonial army could stand against the powerful British military. The war continued to grow as more colonists joined the Continental Army. Cities, villages, and farms became part of the growing rebellion against British rule. But while the fighting continued, colonial leaders were beginning to consider a bold and historic step. They were no longer just fighting for their rights as British citizens. They were preparing to declare complete independence from the British Empire, and this decision would soon change the course of world history forever. Independence. By the year 1776, the conflict between the American colonies and the British Empire had grown into a full revolution. Fighting had already taken place across several regions, and the relationship between the colonies and Britain had become impossible to repair. Many colonial leaders now believed that the only solution was complete independence. During this time, representatives from the 13 colonies gathered again at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They discussed the future of the colonies and debated whether they should officially break away from British rule. One of the most influential voices during this period was a young political thinker named Thomas Jefferson. Along with other leaders, such as John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, Jefferson helped write a document that would change history forever. This document became known as the Declaration of Independence. On July 4, 1776, the 13 American colonies officially declared their independence from the British Empire. The Declaration explained that all people have certain natural rights, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It also stated that governments should exist to protect these rights, and if a government becomes oppressive, people have the right to change it. The signing of this document was a bold and dangerous step. By declaring independence, the colonies were openly challenging one of the most powerful empires in the world. Britain considered this an act of rebellion, and the war between the colonies. After declaring independence in 1776, the American colonies faced a very difficult challenge. They were fighting against the British Empire, which at that time was one of the most powerful nations in the world. Britain had a large professional army, strong financial resources, and the most powerful navy on the seas. In comparison, the Continental Army led by George Washington was still developing. Many soldiers were volunteers, supplies were limited, and the army often struggled with shortages of food, clothing, and weapons. Because of these difficulties, American leaders realized that they needed support from other countries if they wanted to defeat Britain. Fortunately, Britain had many rivals in Europe. One of its greatest enemies was France. France had lost several territories to Britain in earlier wars and was eager for an opportunity to weaken British power. When French leaders saw the American colonies fighting for independence, they recognized a chance to challenge their longtime rival. At first, France secretly supported the American cause by sending weapons, supplies, and financial aid. But everything changed after a major battle in 1777. In October of that year, American forces won an important victory against the British Army at the Battle of Saratoga. This victory proved to the world that the American revolutionaries had a real chance of defeating Britain. After hearing about the victory at Saratoga, France decided to openly support the American colonies. In 1778, France officially formed an alliance with the United States. This alliance was extremely important for the American cause. French ships, soldiers, and financial support helped strengthen the American war effort. The powerful French Navy also became a major threat to British forces around the world. Other European countries such as Spain and the Netherlands also began supporting the American struggle against Britain. With these powerful allies joining the conflict, the war between Britain and the American colonies turned into a larger international war. Now the British Empire was not only fighting the American revolutionaries, but also facing powerful European rivals. The balance of the war was slowly beginning to change, and soon, a decisive battle would occur that would finally determine the future of the American Revolution. By the early 1780s, the American Revolutionary War had been raging for several years. Both sides had suffered heavy losses, and the conflict had spread across many parts of the colonies. The British Army still held several important cities, but the Continental Army continued fighting with determination. During this period, General George Washington focused on weakening British forces and preventing them from gaining full control of the colonies. With support from French allies, the American forces slowly began gaining strength. One of the most important moments of the war came in 1781. At that time, a large British army led by General Charles Cornwallis had moved into the region of Virginia. Cornwallis believed he could maintain control of the area and receive support from the powerful British Navy. However, Washington saw an opportunity. With the help of French forces under General Rochambeau, Washington organized a plan to trap the British Army. American and French troops moved quickly toward the town of Yorktown in Virginia, where Cornwallis had established his defensive position. At the same time, the French Navy moved into position along the coast to block British ships from reaching the area. This strategy worked perfectly. The British Army at Yorktown suddenly found itself surrounded by American and French forces on land, while the French Navy prevented reinforcements from arriving by sea. The situation quickly became hopeless. For the British. For several weeks, American and French artillery bombarded British defenses. The British soldiers were trapped with limited supplies and no chance of escape. Finally, in October 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered his army at Yorktown. This surrender became the most important turning point of the American Revolutionary War. Although small battles continued afterward, the defeat at Yorktown convinced the British government that continuing the war would be too costly. Soon negotiations began to end the conflict, and the war that had started with a small rebellion in the colonies was about to create a brand new, the United States of America. The birth of a new nation. After the British Army surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, it became clear that the American colonies had a real chance of winning their independence. Although the war was not officially over yet, the defeat of such a large British force shocked leaders in Britain and changed the direction of the conflict. In London, many politicians began questioning whether continuing the war was worth the cost. The British Empire had already spent enormous resources fighting the rebellion, and now they were also facing pressure from other European rivals such as France and Spain. Because of these challenges, the British government decided to begin negotiations with the American leaders. Peace talks soon started in Europe. Representatives from the American colonies, including Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, traveled to negotiate with British officials. These discussions focused on creating a treaty that would officially end the war. Finally, in 1783, an agreement was reached. This agreement became known as the Treaty of Paris. According to this treaty, Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. The 13 colonies were no longer part of the British Empire. Instead, they had become a new and independent nation. For the people who had fought in the Revolution, this moment was historic. After years of struggle, sacrifice, and war, the colonies had successfully gained their freedom. But independence also created new challenges. The young nation now needed to build its own government, create laws, organize its economy, and protect itself from foreign threats. Leaders of the new country understood that the success of the United States would depend on strong leadership and cooperation among the states. George Washington, who had led the Continental Army during the war, became one of the most respected figures in the new nation. A few years later, he would become the first president of the United States. The American Revolution had not only created a new country, but had also introduced powerful ideas about freedom, democracy, and self-government. These ideas would influence many other revolutions around the world. But the story of the United States was only beginning. In the years that followed, the new nation would continue growing, expanding its territory, and eventually becoming one of the most powerful countries in the world. Building a new government. After gaining independence in 1783, the United States faced a new and difficult challenge. Winning the war was only the first step. Now the leaders of the new nation had to build a stable government that could unite the 13 states and guide the country into the future. At first, the United States operated under a system called the Articles of Confederation. This system created a very weak central government where most power remained with the individual states. While this arrangement helped the states maintain their independence, it also created many problems. The national government had very limited authority. It could not collect taxes effectively, regulate trade between the states, or maintain a strong national army. As a result, the young nation struggled with economic problems and political disagreements. Many leaders realized that a stronger and more organized government was necessary. In 1787, representatives from the states gathered in Philadelphia for a meeting known as the Constitutional Convention. Their goal was to design a new system of government that would be stronger but still protect the freedoms of the people. During this convention, the leaders created a document that would become one of the most important political documents in history, the United States Constitution. The Constitution established a balanced system of government with three branches: the legislative branch to create laws, the executive branch to enforce laws, and the judicial branch to interpret laws. This system was designed to prevent any one branch of government from becoming expansion and growth. After establishing its new government, the United States began a period of rapid growth and expansion. The country was still young, but its leaders believed that the future of the nation depended on expanding its territory and building a stronger economy. One of the most important moments in this expansion came in 1803 when the United States made a historic deal with France. This agreement became known as the Louisiana Purchase. Through this purchase, the United States acquired a massive amount of land west of the Mississippi River. This single decision nearly doubled the size of the country and opened new opportunities for exploration and settlement. Soon after, an expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark was sent to explore this newly acquired territory. Their journey helped map the western lands and revealed the vast resources that existed across the continent. As more settlers moved westward, the nation continued expanding. New towns and cities were established, farms spread across the countryside, and trade routes connected different parts of the growing country. However, expansion also brought new challenges. The growing nation faced conflicts with Native American tribes and disagreements about how new territories should be governed. These tensions would later lead to some of the most difficult conflicts in American history. At the same time, the United States continued strengthening its economy. Trade increased, industries began to develop, and the population grew rapidly. The young nation was slowly transforming into a stronger and more influential country. But even as the United States expanded across the continent, it would soon face another major test. In the middle of the 19th century, the country would be divided by a conflict so powerful that it would lead to one of the most devastating wars in American history, the American Civil War. And this war would reshape the future of the United States forever. The Civil War and the fight for unity. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States had grown rapidly in both size and population. However, this growth also created serious disagreements between different parts of the country. One of the biggest issues dividing the nation was slavery. In the southern states, slavery was deeply connected to the agricultural economy, especially in large cotton plantations. In the northern states, however, slavery had mostly been abolished, and many people believed it was morally wrong. As the country continued expanding westward, a major question appeared. Would the new territories allow slavery or not? This issue created strong political tension between the northern and southern states. The disagreement grew stronger every year until it eventually pushed the nation toward conflict. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, and many southern states feared that their economic system would be threatened. Soon after Lincoln's election, several southern states decided to leave the United States and form a separate nation called the Confederate States of America. This decision led directly to war. In 1861, the American Civil War began. It became one of the most destructive wars in American history. On one side was the Union, which represented the northern states that wanted to preserve the United States as a single nation. On the other side was the Confederacy, made up of southern states that had separated from the Union. The war lasted 4 long years and involved massive armies, new military technologies, and devastating battles across the country. Cities and farms were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost their lives. One of the most important moments of the war came in 1863, when President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that enslaved people in Confederate territories were free. This decision transformed the war into a fight not only to preserve the Union, but also to end slavery. Finally, in 1865, the Confederate forces surrendered, and the Civil War came to an end. The United States remained united as one nation. Although the war had caused enormous destruction, it also ended slavery and strengthened the power of the federal government. After the Civil War, the United States entered a new period of rebuilding and industrial growth that would soon transform the country into a major global power. The rise of a global power. After the American Civil War ended in 1865, the United States began entering a new era of rapid growth and transformation. The country started rebuilding its economy and infrastructure, and new industries began developing across the nation. Railroads expanded across the continent, connecting cities and towns that were once separated by vast distances. Factories began producing goods on a massive scale, and new inventions helped improve transportation, communication, and manufacturing. During this period, the United States experienced an industrial revolution that changed the structure of its economy. Steel production, oil industries, and large manufacturing companies grew rapidly. Cities expanded as millions of people moved to urban areas in search of jobs and better opportunities. Immigration also played an important role in the growth of the country. Millions of people from Europe and other parts of the world arrived in the United States, bringing new skills, cultures, and ideas that contributed to the nation's development. By the late 19th century, the United States had become one of the largest industrial economies in the world. At the same time, the country began increasing its influence beyond its own borders. In 1898, the United States fought a short but important conflict known as the Spanish-American War. During this war, the United States defeated Spain and gained control of several territories, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. This victory marked the beginning of the United States' emergence as a global power. In the decades that followed, the country continued strengthening its economy, expanding its military, and increasing its political influence around the world. But the true test of American power would come in the 20th century, when two massive global conflicts would reshape the world forever. These conflicts would become known as the First World War and the Second World War, and through these wars, the United States would rise to become one of the most powerful nations on Earth. World Wars and the rise of a superpower. As the 20th century began, the world was entering a period of massive global conflict. Powerful nations were competing for influence, resources, and territory. These tensions eventually led to one of the largest wars in human history, the First World War. When World War I began in 1914, the United States initially chose to remain neutral. American leaders believed it was better to stay out of the European conflict. However, as the war continued, events began to pull the United States closer to the battlefield. German submarine attacks on ships and growing tensions with European powers eventually pushed the United States to join the war in 1917. When American soldiers arrived in Europe, they provided fresh strength and resources to the Allied forces. Within a year, the balance of the war shifted, and in 1918 the conflict finally ended with the defeat of Germany and its allies. Although the United States played an important role in World War I, its influence would grow even more during the next global conflict. In 1939, World War II began in Europe when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Once again, the United States initially tried to stay out of the war. But in 1941, everything changed when Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This attack shocked the American public and forced the United States to enter World War II. The country quickly mobilized its economy, industries, and military forces on a massive scale. American factories produced weapons, ships, aircraft, and vehicles at an unprecedented rate. Millions of soldiers were trained and sent to battle across Europe and the Pacific. By the end of the war in 1945, the United States had played a decisive role in defeating both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. When the war ended, much of Europe and Asia had been devastated. The Cold War and American global power. After the end of World War II in 1945, the world entered a new era of political tension known as the Cold War. The United States had emerged from the war as one of the most powerful nations in the world. Its economy was strong, its military was advanced, and its influence had expanded across many regions. However, another powerful nation was also rising on the global stage, the Soviet Union. The United States supported democratic governments and capitalist economic systems, while the Soviet Union promoted communist ideology. These two superpowers soon became rivals, competing for influence around the world. Although the Cold War did not involve direct large-scale battles between the United States and the Soviet Union, it created many conflicts in different parts of the world. Both nations supported different sides in regional wars and political struggles. During this time, the United States invested heavily in its military strength, technology, and global alliances. Organizations such as NATO were created to strengthen cooperation between the United States and its allies. The Cold War also became a race for technological and scientific dominance. The United States and the Soviet Union competed in space exploration, nuclear weapons development, and advanced military technologies. One of the most famous achievements of this era occurred in 1969 when the United States successfully landed astronauts on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. Throughout the Cold War, the United States continued strengthening its position as a global leader. Its economy expanded, its military alliances grew stronger, and its influence spread across many regions of the world. By the end of the 20th century, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, marking the end of the Cold War. With the disappearance of its main rival, the United States became the most powerful nation in the world. From a group of small colonies in the 18th century to a global superpower in modern times, the story of the United States is one of transformation, struggle, and growth. And this journey continues to shape global politics and international relations even today. The rise of the United States is one of the most remarkable stories in modern history. What once began as 13 small colonies under the control of the British Empire eventually transformed into one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Through revolutions, civil wars, industrial growth, and global conflicts, the United States slowly built its strength and influence across the world. Each major event in its history played a role in shaping the nation we know today. The American Revolution created the foundation of independence. The Civil War preserved the unity of the country and ended slavery. Industrial expansion turned the United States into an economic powerhouse. Then the two world wars and the Cold War pushed the nation into a position of global leadership. Today, the United States continues to play a major role in international politics, military alliances, technological innovation, and global economics. But the story of America's rise also reminds us that power is not built in a single moment. It is the result of centuries of struggle, decisions, and historical turning points. From a small group of colonies to a global superpower, the journey of the United States is a powerful example of how history can shape the future of the entire world.